Hi, my name is Adam Palmer, and I am the Chief Cybersecurity Strategist for Tenable. I'm going to be talking to you in the next few minutes about risk-based vulnerability management and how you can successfully answer one of the most critical questions from business leaders, which is, what is the health of my security program? How secure are we? This is my email address. Please feel free at the top to connect with me directly. And by the way, at any time during this presentation, I would encourage you to feel free to use the instant messaging service, and you can send questions. I'm going to be trying to answer those questions as best I can at the end of this session, but I would encourage you, please feel free to use that and send me questions, and I'll do my best to respond to those at the end of this. And also after today, feel free to email me directly at apalmer.tenable.com if I can be of any support to you. I can't possibly cover the depth of every topic here today, so I'm happy to discuss more with you later. Just briefly about me, I have 20 years of cybersecurity operational experience. I was a former CISO in the United States. Most recently, I was a global director for cyber risk at Santander. I'm currently based in Dublin, Ireland. And just a little bit about Tenable. We are a 20-year-old company headquartered in the United States. We have offices all across the world and all across Europe. We are routinely recognized by independent industry groups as the #1 company in vulnerability management. You see Forrester and IDC as examples here. Again, we're publicly traded, 20-year-old company on the NASDAQ stock exchange. So let's focus on how do you answer how secure are we? And when business leaders ask this question, I don't think they want a long 300-page answer. So how do you effectively do that? And I think the answer is with risk-based vulnerability management. And I'll start with a quote by McKinsey Consulting. McKinsey, of course, is one of the most respected global consulting firms. And they said that companies that have used the Tenable approach, the risk-based vulnerability management approach, can reduce risk by almost 7.5 times or improve their security almost 8 times above their original program at no added cost. And that seems unbelievable. But the answer is because if you apply effective risk-based vulnerability management, you become more efficient, you focus on what matters, you might invest more money at the initial stage of an effective risk-based VM program, but you'll save money downstream in reduced operational costs and less patches, less security vulnerabilities, and of course, fewer data breaches. So it's like, as one CEO actually said to me a few months ago, that this is the foundation of your strategy. So if you focus on this aggressively and well, risk-based VM, almost nothing else matters. But let's begin, before we jump into how to have an effective risk-based vulnerability management program, let's talk a little bit about the attack surface. When I mentioned my last job at a large European bank, I was primarily focused on that bottom layer of traditional IT assets. These are the laptops, the mobile devices, the desktops and servers that we all are very familiar with. Now, of course, many security leaders that I work with are also now looking at cloud assets. So you're looking at maybe a hybrid model of some assets in the cloud, the public cloud, or some on premises. You're looking at containers and development ops. But I want to highlight that top layer as well. This is the operational technology. Sometimes we used to call it industrial technology. But I really think OT is a good way to describe it, because it's not just about manufacturing. Think of all the smart connected access control devices in your environment, the HVAC devices. Often these are total blind spots. They're old devices, they're not patched, they're misconfigured, and we're increasingly seeing attackers use these devices to attack them because they know they're not secured and they're a blind spot for security leaders. The attackers attack them and move laterally into the wider IT network. And the problem with that expanded threat landscape is that legacy vulnerability management solutions just simply can't keep up. There's limited visibility, ineffective prioritization, and just overall poor communication. The legacy tools often used for vulnerability management just can't handle the modern attack surface. And I'll share with you an example of that. CVSS scores. This is what are commonly used, these common vulnerability scores. What you may not know is that often these can be 2 weeks old. They have no context, and almost 60% of them are rated critical or high. So imagine if you have 100,000 CVSS scores and 60% of those are critical or high, almost 60,000 vulnerabilities are going to be critical or high. So the problem is a matter of a fundamental data problem that you cannot have, regardless of the size of your team. You'll never have enough resources to remediate every vulnerability across your attack surface. So I want to share with you, before we jump into what to do right, let's talk about one common security mistake. And actually, just to back up 1 second, if you are using CVSS scores, I understand some people have to for PCI reasons or compliance reasons. I'd encourage you to start using some of the prioritization methods in parallel to that I'm going to describe. So even if you have to use CVSS scores for compliance reasons, you can still use some of these prioritization techniques that I'm going to talk about. But before we jump into that, again, let's talk about a common security mistake that I see a lot of organizations use. And I use this myself in every organization where I had an operational role. So I confess this is something I did, and I see it probably in about 80 to 90% of the organizations I work at, which is the RAG score, the red, amber, green score. This is, you identify some random generic risk, like say access management in the first quarter, you label that as red. Midway through the year, you've deployed some control, about 50%, so you label it as amber or yellow. And then at the end of the year, you fully deployed that control in your environment, so you label the risk as green. You successfully controlled the risk. But why does this fail? You've only measured the milestones. You haven't measured any risk reduction. You haven't measured whether, in fact, the risk that you identified is even a risk that should be a priority. All you've measured is the deployment of a control. And for communication, how can a business leader possibly make a decision, a strategic business decision, if you tell them that the risk is amber? You need a quantifiable cyber exposure score. So that's why it fails. And if you take this approach, it really leads, I think, to low visibility of assets. You have a false sense of security based on incomplete data. You end up with easily exploitable vulnerabilities available to attackers. You spend time and effort addressing low risk issues, and you really don't have an ability to effectively communicate. As I mentioned, you can't effectively communicate that risk to business leaders or the maturity of your program. So I want to, kind of make this final comment on that, is it's not adequate to build capabilities. You as a security leader should be focused on adding value and showing risk reduction. And, one more, I mentioned the McKinsey quote at the beginning about how you can improve your security almost 8 times at no added cost. But also Gartner, again, another independent respected industry group, says that by 2022, organizations that use the risk-based vulnerability management method that Tenable supports will suffer 80% fewer breaches. And it's important to remember this because it's the basic cyber hygiene that matters so much. So many times, and even in my own career, you get focused on these advanced attacks, these APTs, nation state attacks, and they're real. They absolutely are real, but they account for only about 1 to 2% of data breaches. If you look at what most data breaches are for organizations, the vast majority of those are caused by vulnerabilities in the environment that the organization knew about but never remediated, or a lack of visibility of their assets and lack of visibility or lack of remediation of basic vulnerabilities. So if you can improve your basic cyber hygiene, improve your visibility of assets, improve how you remediate the most basic vulnerabilities, you dramatically improve your security program. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about, how to successfully do that. So also, I'll say this before starting this, is that if you asked me at any prior job, did I have a risk-based vulnerability management approach, I would have said yes. But the truth is, and now, since in learning and once I discovered Tenable, I really realized there is a better way, because I was just having those generic risks. I was building milestones, building capabilities, but not really focusing on the vulnerabilities and risks. So the way Tenable approaches it is with 2 parts. We said the first part is the VPR, the vulnerability priority rating. The vulnerability priority rating is looking at a deep insight about that vulnerability, so you can understand how it might affect your environment. It's looking at the recency of the threat, how intense is it, what type of asset does it exploit, how old is it, and what type of threat source is it? Is it a nation state attack, or is it a cyber criminal gang? Different techniques, different goals in different groups. So we leverage machine learning, intelligence, proprietary algorithms to calculate the priority of a vulnerability based on the real threat that it poses to your environment. And now I want to also talk to you for a second about context before I talk about the other half of this. So I often give this example of a question: what is the risk of a bald tire? I asked this question to a group of security professionals recently, and about 85 to 90% of them said the risk they would rate as high or extremely high. Now, it's a trick question. It's a trick question because I haven't given you the context. If I tell you the tire is actually not on my automobile, but in my garden for my children, you learn that the risk is actually very low. So this is just to illustrate the matter of context. And this is the other half of effective risk-based vulnerability management, which is the ACR, the Asset Criticality Rating. The ACR leverages algorithms to calculate the criticality of an asset to focus your prioritization efforts. So we look at the type of the business purpose of the device, what type of device it is, what does it connect to, what capabilities does it have, where is it located in your environment, does it have third-party data on it, are third parties accessing that device? And once you have this deep knowledge of the VPR, the vulnerability priority rating, plus the ACR, the asset criticality rating, you can focus first on what matters most. Or another way to look at this is focusing on this number, this 97%. So this is an example of we estimate that if you take this approach, the Tenable approach, you reduce the critical vulnerabilities you need to focus on by just you need to only focus on about 3 to 5% of what you're previously doing. And as an example of this, I was talking to a CISO at a large healthcare company a few months ago. And when he first started implementing Tenable, he said for the first time, he saw thousands of more assets and he thought he had a lot more work. He was quite scared. He said he saw all these other new assets in the cloud and OT environment. But then he realized that actually he had less work because he only had to focus on that 3 to 5% that are critical. So you realize that for the first time, you see the entire attack surface and all your assets, but you become much more efficient. You save money. This is how you achieve that 8-time improvement of security at no added cost, because you dramatically reduce the amount of work you need to apply and the amount of tools you need to focus on those critical vulnerabilities, but you significantly improve your security program. So the strategy is about answers and not just building capabilities. It's about prioritization, cost reduction, improving efficiency, optimizing your team, and ultimately reducing risk as the answer. So I talk to a lot of companies. I work with a lot of CISOs on their strategy. And what do I commonly see? I see them they scan infrequently. They don't use authentication during their scans. The security team, they report their raw findings. Maybe they dump a PDF file onto a business unit with vulnerabilities. And it's kind of a simple process of analyze, kind of prioritize, report it, relax, repeat. And I would say that this is vulnerability assessment, not true vulnerability management. True vulnerability management starts with vulnerability assessment, but it's much deeper than that. It has validation of those risks. It prioritizes based on understanding the assets and their context. You have effective patch management and remediation, software security assessments from development through DevOps into production, testing, retesting, and quality assurance processes. And you have quantifiable cyber exposure metrics where you can really analyze your program for all levels of the organization. So you really want to be identifying where you're exposed, how using that to drive remediation and focus on risk reduction, not blind capability building. And let's just returning to a place we started before about the convergence, the blind spot of IT/OT risk. Just remember that this really is a significant blind spot where I see a lot of security leaders aren't aware of the convergence and all the OT devices, the operational technology devices in their environment that are connecting and allowing weakness and vulnerabilities. I see no visibility into the OT networks. It's outdated equipment, undocumented protocols, no configuration tracking, and it really ends up being invisible assets. And not just in manufacturing, but I'll share this example. In 2019, the Hydro aluminum plant, 35,000 employees, 40 countries, an attack against their OT environment really shut down a lot of their production capability and cost them $40 million in the first week. I could give you several other examples over the last year, but I just wanted to kind of use this as an example of the importance of this, and that we are increasingly seeing these attacks because the attackers know it's a vulnerability and a blind spot. And often what I'll hear is people will say, well, they're air gapped. But I would encourage you to go and look at those devices in your environment. And I think what you might see is exactly this picture, is that even if it's for a few minutes or a few hours each month, that those controllers have ports that allow access into your IT network. And you may have unknown persons, third parties, consulting firms, system integrators plugging into them, and they now have free ability to move laterally into your IT network. And we see it going the opposite direction as well. We've seen certainly attacks against IT networks that are targeting and moving laterally into those unsecured OT networks and shutting down production or manufacturing. So just to kind of close out here for a few minutes, the one area I haven't focused on yet to talk about is a lot of business leaders, though, still ask, how secure are we? And we as security professionals, we end up answering with these ambiguous, these heat matrices or these red, amber, green scores. And those are really, not very effective. They just simply don't communicate risk. Every other form of risk management provides quantifiable data to business leaders, except for cyber risk often. We're the only ones that seem to need to be different, and I think this causes a communication gap. Because business leaders don't fully understand the risk. It's not being communicated well to them, and it's causing problems to align the business to the security program. So how can you do that more effectively? And I think one way to do that is with a tool called Lumen. Lumen is a tool that Tenable has developed, and it has a 4.5 petabyte data lake of information, as well as looking at 1.5 billion vulnerabilities per week that Tenable analyzes, as well as lots of third-party data intelligence and resources. And this is fed into all the data for each customer of the vulnerability priority ratings, the asset criticality ratings for each customer, and looking at the business context. And what that provides is a cyber exposure score. This is a quantifiable score. And that's a really powerful tool to help you move to a quantifiable reporting system and analysis. So it now allows you to look at trends over time in your environment. You can compare different business units. You can compare against your peers as well. And it's, you may be interested in, and you want to compare, how am I compared to other similar organizations? And I can save you 2 years of work. In my last job at the bank, I was focused very much on how do we quantify cyber risk. And it's really a challenge, but the cyber exposure score is really the answer to that. Allowing you to look at trends over time, peer benchmarking, and providing a quantifiable score. So a lot of the main questions I get is, so how do I start? How do I move from where I currently am to improving vulnerability management? And I think a lot of organizations I talk to, they're very much focused on that bottom layer of traditional vulnerability management. It's very people-powered, it's ad hoc, compliance-driven. They're asking, you're just asking, where are we exposed? You're trying to understand, what are the assets in my environment? And I understand this is the most important question you need to first ask is, what are my assets? But I'd encourage you after that to try to move to that next level of risk-based vulnerability management. And this is really powered by machine learning, continuous assessment, and answering the questions of not only just what do I have, but how do I effectively prioritize and how do I compare to my peers? And then the next step up is really connecting your security program to the business. So it's asking, how are we reducing risk over time? Are we measuring and improving our security program? And are we including analytics beyond vulnerability management in our program? And sometimes I'm asked, how do you make the first step in this? And I think it's just, doing a proof of value, testing this in your environment, comparing this to your current tools and seeing how that can improve. And are you taking a true risk-based analysis approach, or are you, you just using generic risks and milestone capacity building? And again, feel free to email me at apalmer@tenable.com, apalmer@tenable.com. And also check out tenable.com. We have a lot of free resources on there, white papers about all the concepts that I talked about, because I can't possibly cover all of that in this short presentation. But I encourage you, if you look there, you'll find a lot of free resources and more information about all these ideas, the ACR and the VPR that I talked about with you. And again, please continue to IM me here. I'm going to now in just a minute be available to help answer questions. And also, I'd encourage you to visit with the Tenable team in the virtual conference lounge. We're going to be available, and we have lots of experts who would be happy to have short conversations with you today, or long conversations anytime about any of these concepts, and help you learn more about Tenable and how we can help you improve your security program. So I wish you all the very best. Please reach out to me, connect to me on LinkedIn if you would like. And I wish you all the very best success. And I'll be available now to answer any questions. Thank you.